I'm Claire, 26 female. I work as a financial analyst, a job that's all about numbers, patterns, and logical consequences. For the past 2 years, I've been living back at my childhood home with my mother, Madeline, and my older brother, Luke. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement to aggressively pay down my student loans and build a down payment for my own place. My life was a neat spreadsheet of income, savings, and projections, all leading to a clear goal: independence. But what I failed to account for was the emotional variable, the one that can crash even the most stable system. The story I'm about to tell you is about how I discovered that the family I was supporting was secretly built on a foundation of debt and deceit, and how my departure caused the entire structure to collapse. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Living at home at 26 wasn't my dream, but it was practical. My job in the city paid well, but the cost of living was astronomical. When my father passed away 3 years ago, my mom, Madeline, was left with just her modest teacher's pension and the house. It seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement when I moved back in. I would cover the majority of the household expenses, the mortgage payment, utilities, groceries, internet, and in exchange, I'd live rent-free. This allowed me to funnel a huge portion of my salary into my savings and loan accounts. My brother, Luke, who was 30 and worked as a marketing manager for some flashy tech startup, also lived there. He contributed, or so I thought, but his contributions were always vague. He'd occasionally buy a round of expensive groceries from a gourmet market or cover a dinner out, grand gestures that seemed substantial, but lacked the consistent, foundational support that keeps a household running. The unspoken agreement was that I was the financial bedrock. I set up automatic transfers for everything. The mortgage payment left my account on the first of the month like clockwork. The electric, gas, and water bills were all under my name, paid without fail. I never complained. I saw it as my duty, a way to support my mom, and in a way, honor my dad's memory by ensuring she was secure. I was the quiet, reliable engine humming in the background, keeping the lights on and the house warm. My mom was always grateful, or at least she performed gratitude well. She'd thank me for being so responsible, so much like my father. Luke, on the other hand, treated my contributions as an entitlement. He saw the stable home environment as the default setting, not as something being actively maintained by my salary. He lived his life with a flourish, always dressed in the latest brands, driving a sleek new car that seemed a bit too expensive for his salary, and talking about lavish client dinners and weekend trips. I was the planner, the saver. Luke was the spender, the performer. My mother was the audience, applauding both of us but always seeming a little more dazzled by Luke's showmanship. He was the golden child, the one with the exciting career and the charismatic personality. I was just Claire, the sensible one with the spreadsheets. In our family dynamic, sensible was a synonym for boring. My life revolved around my work and my savings goals. I rarely went out, packed my lunch every day, and found satisfaction in watching my net worth tick upward. It wasn't a thrilling existence, but it was secure, and it was leading me toward the future I wanted. The tension, however, was always simmering just beneath the surface. It would flare up in small ways. Luke would borrow my expensive noise-canceling headphones and forget to return them for weeks. He'd finish the specialty coffee I bought for myself and never think to replace it. When I'd gently bring it up, he'd roll his eyes and call me uptight or petty. "Relax, Claire," he'd say with a dismissive wave. "It's just coffee." My mom would usually side with him, urging me to be more easygoing and not to sweat the small stuff. But the small stuff was beginning to pile up, forming a mountain of disrespect that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. I was paying for the stage on which Luke performed his grand life, and my ticket was the privilege of being taken for granted. The financial arrangement was clear in my mind, but I realize now it was never actually discussed in detail. It evolved out of necessity after my dad died and just solidified over time. I paid the bills because they needed to be paid, and I was the only one with the discipline and income to do it consistently. Luke's financial life was a black box. He talked a big game about his commissions and bonuses, but he was always cagey about the specifics. If I ever asked a direct question, he'd accuse me of being nosy or, worse, jealous of H. Is success. My mom would just smile and say, "Luke is doing so well for himself, we should be proud." The problem was, their pride in him seemed to be funded by my pragmatism. The family car, a reliable SUV that was technically my mom's, was one of the few major assets left. My dad had paid it off years ago, but recently it had started having mechanical issues. I was the one who paid for the new tires last winter and the brake job a few months ago. Luke used the car far more than I did, zipping around town for his meetings, yet he never offered to chip in for gas, let alone maintenance. When I pointed this out, he scoffed. "It's Mom's car, Claire, we all use it." This logic was infuriating. I was paying to maintain an asset that he primarily used, and I was made to feel like the bad guy for even mentioning it. The house was supposed to be a safe harbor, a place to rebuild and save. But slowly, it was starting to feel like a cage, one where I was the primary caretaker, and my family members were the pampered, ungrateful residents. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just a little longer, and I'd have my down payment. Just a few more months of biting my tongue, and I'd be free. I had no idea how close I was to the breaking point, or how devastating the fallout would be when I finally reached it. The final argument, the one that shattered the fragile peace of our home, started over something ridiculously small: a carton of almond milk. It was a specific, expensive brand that I bought for myself. I came home late from work one Tuesday, exhausted after a grueling day of closing out quarterly reports. All I wanted was a bowl of cereal and an hour of quiet before bed. I opened the fridge and found the carton of almond milk nearly empty, with maybe a single tablespoon left at the bottom. It was Luke's signature move, using up the last of something and putting the empty container back. It was lazy, inconsiderate, and on this particular night, it felt like the ultimate symbol of his disrespect. I found him lounging on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, the TV blaring. "Luke, did you finish my almond milk again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, probably. What's the big deal? Just buy more." The casual indifference in his voice was like a match to fuse. "The big deal, Luke," I said, my voice rising, "is that you constantly use my things I pay for, and you never replace them. It's a simple courtesy." He finally looked at me, a smirk on his face. "Oh, here we go. St. Clair, the keeper of the sacred almond milk. You act like you're single-handedly funding this entire household." That was it, the dam broke. All the pent-up frustration from the past 2 years came rushing out. "I practically am," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. "I pay the mortgage, Luke. I pay the electricity, the gas, the internet, and for 90% of the food in this house. What do? You buy a fancy block of cheese once a month and act like you're a patron of the arts." His smirk vanished, replaced by a defensive glare. "I contribute plenty. I handle my own expenses. I don't ask you for anything. My paying for your shelter, your hot water, and the lights you leave on in every room isn't asking me for anything. You live here like it's a hotel that I am funding so you can afford your designer clothes and your overpriced car." The argument escalated quickly, our voices rising to shouts. My mom came rushing in from the kitchen, her face etched with anxiety. "What's going on? Why are you two fighting?" Luke immediately turned to her, playing the victim. "Mom, can you believe this? She's attacking me over a carton of milk. She's waving bills in my face, acting like she's some kind of martyr because she helps out around the house." "Helps out?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Mom, you know what I pay. You know I handle the big bills. Luke floats through life on my dime while pretending he's a big shot." Madeline looked from me to Luke, her expression pleading. "Claire, please, don't be like this. We're a family. We all chip in where we can. Luke is under a lot of pressure at his new job." It was her classic move, defending him, making excuses for him, and framing me as the aggressor. She always chose his comfort over my fairness. It was in that moment that I realized she wasn't just a passive observer. She was an active enabler of his behavior. She benefited from my financial stability just as much as he did, but she validated his entitlement because he was her golden boy. The feeling of betrayal was sharp and painful. Pressure? Mom, I am under pressure every single day to make sure the mortgage is paid so you both have a roof over your heads. He gets to live a carefree life because I don't. That's when Luke stood up, his face red with fury. He got right in my face, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. You know what your problem is? You're miserable. So you want everyone else to be miserable too. You love holding this over us. It makes you feel important. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. He shouted, his voice echoing through the small house, "You're just a parasite dragging us down. You think you're helping, but you're just sucking the life out of this family with your constant scorekeeping." He turned, walked to the front door, and wrenched it open. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with contempt. "Find somewhere else to suck off." He slammed the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, stunned, my heart pounding in my ears. The word parasite echoed in my head. A parasite, me, the one who was meticulously managing her finances to keep the family afloat. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. I looked at my mom, expecting to see some defense, some comfort. Instead, she just looked at the floor and wrung her hands. "He didn't mean it, Claire," she whispered. "He's just stressed." She wouldn't even look at me. She couldn't, because in that moment we both knew a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. She had made her choice. She chose his side. It was in that crushing silence, with the door still vibrating from the force of his anger, that I made my decision. He was right about one thing. I did need to find somewhere else to go. So I turned without another word, walked up to my room, and started to pack. Packing was a surreal experience. I moved with a strange, detached calm, the emotional shock having numbed me completely. I pulled out my 2 large suitcases and began methodically folding my clothes, sorting my belongings, and dismantling the life I had built within those 4 walls. Each item I packed was a reminder of the lie I had been living. The professional work attire I bought on sale, the sensible shoes, the well-worn textbooks from my certification courses, all symbols of the responsibility and discipline my own family had just spat back in my face. The word parasite kept replaying in my mind. A parasite is an organism that lives in or on another organism, its host, and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. The definition was a perfect, sickening fit, just not for me. I was the host, and they were the ones who had been feeding off my resources, my stability, and my sense of duty. I called my best friend, Ella. Her voice was a warm, sane anchor in my sea of chaos. "Claire, what's wrong? You sound awful." I explained everything in a flat, monotone voice, the almond milk, the argument, the shouting, the slam of the door, and that one final, unforgivable word. Ella was silent for a moment, and then she said, "I'm on my way. Pack a bag for a few weeks. You're staying with me." There was no hesitation, no question of whether I was overreacting. She just offered a solution, a safe place. While I waited for her, I went to my desk and started printing documents. Bank statements, utility bills under my name, mortgage payment confirmations. I compiled a thick folder, a complete record of my financial contributions over the past 2 years. It was my own personal audit, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a parasite. My mother hovered at my bedroom door, her face pale and worried. "Claire, what are you doing? You can't be serious. Where will you go?" I didn't look at her. "I'm going to stay with a friend," I said, my voice cold and clipped. "Luke told me to leave, so I'm leaving." "He was just angry," she pleaded. "You know how he gets. He'll apologize tomorrow." I finally turned to face her, the folder of documents in my hand. "No, Mom, he won't, and even if he did, it wouldn't matter. He said what he truly thinks, and you just stood there, you let him." Her face crumpled, but I felt no pity. My well of sympathy had run dry. Ella arrived 20 minutes later, her expression a mix of fury and concern. She hugged me tightly and then glared at my mother, who was now openly crying in the hallway. Ella didn't say a word to her. She just helped me carry my suitcases down the stairs and out to her car. As I stood on the porch of the house I had kept from falling into foreclosure, I looked back one last time. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to be a part of. The next morning, I began the process of extricating myself. I logged into my online banking portal. The first and most important bill was the mortgage. It was tied directly to my checking account. With a few clicks, I canceled the automatic payment. Then I went down the list. Electricity, canceled. Gas, canceled. Water and sewer, canceled. Internet and cable, canceled. All of them were in my name. I was under no legal obligation to continue paying for a residence I no longer occupied. I drafted a simple, formal email to my mother and brother. I attached a summary spreadsheet detailing the average monthly costs I had been covering, totaling just over $3,000 a month. The email read, "Per Luke's request, I have moved out. As I no longer reside at this address, I have ceased payment for all household expenses which were under my name. The accounts will need to be transferred to your name and paid directly by you going forward. The next mortgage payment is due on the 1st of the month." I hit send and felt a profound, terrifying sense of release. The first 3 weeks were quiet. I stayed with Ella, sleeping on her comfortable pull-out sofa. She was a wonderful friend, giving me space when I needed it and providing distraction when the silence became too much. I focused on work, throwing myself into complex financial models and market analyses. It was a relief to deal with numbers. They were logical, predictable, and devoid of emotion. I didn't hear a word from my family. No angry emails, no pleading texts, no missed calls. It was as if I had simply vanished from their lives. Part of me was hurt by the silence, but a larger part was relieved. I half expected them to handle it. I assumed Luke, with his big-shot marketing job, would step up. I assumed my mother would call him to task and they would figure it out. I had provided the information. The responsibility was now theirs. I had underestimated their incompetence and their profound sense of entitlement. They didn't think I was serious. They thought I was throwing a tantrum, that I would cool off and quietly turn the financial taps back on before any real damage was done. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first domino was about to fall, and it was a big one. It was the car. The sleek, new-looking SUV that Luke so proudly drove around town. It was the one major bill that wasn't in my name, but as I would soon discover, it was intricately linked to the financial house of cards I had just walked away from. The phone call came on a Saturday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I had left. I was at a coffee shop with Ella, enjoying a rare moment of peace when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a text came through, a jumble of frantic words. "Claire, call me now. It's an emergency. They took the car." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I excused myself and stepped outside to call her back. She answered on the first ring, her voice a hysterical sob. "Claire, they took the car, the creditors. They just came and towed it away from the driveway. Luke is devastated. What is happening?" I was confused. "What are you talking about, Mom? Dad paid that car off years ago. There are no creditors." "No, not my car," she wailed. "Luke's car, the one he drives for work." This made even less sense. I had assumed his company provided the car or that he had a standard auto loan. "Mom, slow down. I don't understand. Luke's car loan isn't my responsibility. Why are you calling me?" "Because they said the payments weren't made," she cried. "And the loan is connected to the house." The line went quiet for a moment as her words sank in. Connected to the house. That was impossible. My name was on the mortgage along with hers. My dad's name had been removed after he passed. There was no way Luke could have tied a car loan to the property without my signature. "Mom, that's not possible," I said, my voice firm, the financial analyst in me taking over. "I'm on the deed. I would have had to sign off on any loan against the house." "I don't know anything about that," she sobbed. "You have to fix this." Something wasn't adding up. Her panic felt genuine, but her ignorance seemed feigned. After I hung up, I sent a single, calculated text message to Luke. "Mom called, hysterical about your car. She claims it's connected to the house. Explain." His reply was almost instantaneous, and it dripped with the same old arrogance. "Stay out of my business. This has nothing to do with you, you parasite." The use of that word again lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about the truth. I spent the rest of the weekend consumed by a singular mission, to find out what was really going on with my family's finances. As a financial analyst, I had access to certain public records databases and a deep understanding of how to navigate financial paperwork. I started with the county's property records. I pulled up the file for our home address. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the documents. There it was, filed 18 months ago, a home equity line of credit, or HELOC. A second mortgage, essentially. It was for $50,000. The loan was in my mother's name, and my signature was right there on the document, clear as day. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. They hadn't even gotten the loop on the C right. They had forged my signature to take out a massive loan against the family home, the one asset my father had worked his entire life to secure. My hands were shaking. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just irresponsibility, this was fraud. This was a crime. The HELOC had a variable interest rate, and the monthly payments were likely substantial. I dug deeper. A HELOC requires payments. Where was that money coming from? It certainly wasn't coming from Luke's sporadic contributions or my mom's pension. Then, the horrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. The money I was dutifully sending. For the primary mortgage every month. The extra I sometimes included to pay down the principal faster. They weren't using all of it for the mortgage. They must have been skimming from my payments. They were taking the money I provided for the legitimate mortgage and using a portion of it to service the secret, fraudulent loan they had taken out behind my back. That $50,000 was likely gone. It had funded Luke's fancy car, his designer clothes, his expensive dinners, his entire illusion of success. The car wasn't on a simple auto loan. It was probably purchased outright or with a massive down payment from the HELOC funds. The car payments my mom was talking about were likely the monthly payments on the HELOC itself. And when I stopped paying all the household bills, the money they were using to cover the HELOC payment dried up. They missed a payment. Then another. And the bank, as was its right, came for the collateral in this case, the car that was likely tied to the loan. The pieces all clicked into place, forming a picture of deceit so profound it left me breathless. My brother wasn't just an entitled jerk, he was a con artist. And my mother wasn't just a passive enabler, she was his active accomplice. They had conspired to steal from me and risk our family home to finance his lifestyle. The rage I felt was cold and sharp. All the little slights, the casual disrespect, the constant gaslighting, it all made sense now. They had to keep me in the dark. They had to frame me as petty and controlling whenever I asked about money, because a real conversation would have exposed their entire scheme. They didn't just see me as sensible and boring, they saw me as a mark, a resource to be exploited, a host. The Parasite's parting shot had been a confession. I saved a PDF of the forged document. I took screenshots of everything. I was no longer just a hurt daughter and sister seeking emotional distance. I was a financial analyst who had uncovered a conspiracy. And I knew exactly which numbers to crunch and which cords to cut to make the whole rotten structure come crashing down. The discovery of the forged HELOC document changed everything. The anger that had been a simmering fire now burned with the cold, clear intensity of a blowtorch. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a calculated act of fraud that had put my financial future and my father's legacy at risk. My first priority was to protect myself. I spent Monday morning on the phone with my bank, a credit reporting agency, and a lawyer my firm kept on retainer for consultations. The lawyer was blunt. "This is a criminal matter, Claire, forgery and fraud. You can press charges. It will be messy and public, but it's your right." I wasn't sure I was ready for that step, not yet. The thought of sending my own mother and brother to jail was still unthinkable, no matter what they had done. But I had to secure my own position. The lawyer's advice was to put everything in writing. I needed to create a paper trail that clearly established my non-involvement and my discovery of the fraud. My next step was to visit the bank that held the mortgage and the HELOC. I brought my passport, my driver's license, and my work ID. I met with the branch manager and a fraud specialist. I showed them my real signature on my identification and compared it to the clumsy forgery on the loan document. The fraud specialist's expression was grim. They immediately opened an official investigation. They confirmed that as long as the investigation found in my favor, I would be absolved of any responsibility for the $50,000 debt. However, the loan was still tied to the house. If my mother defaulted, the bank would foreclose. The home was the collateral. This meant I had a choice to make. I could either let the house go into foreclosure, losing my inheritance and the last physical piece of my father's hard work, or I could find a way to take control. That evening, I sat down and mapped out a plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge in the hot-blooded sense, it was a plan for consequences. It was a financial strategy, cold and logical, designed to dismantle the system of dependence they had built around me. I called it my Parasite's withdrawal. The first phase was already complete. I had cut off my direct financial support. The second phase was communication. I needed to inform them of what I knew, but not in a way that invited argument or negotiation. I composed a second email, this one far more detailed and severe than the first. The subject line was urgent, notice of financial fraud on property at our home address. I addressed it to both my mother and Luke. I laid out the facts in simple, numbered points. I have discovered a home equity line of credit, HELOC, taken out against the property for the amount of $50,000. The loan documents contain a forged signature under my name. I did not authorize, nor was I aware of, this loan. I have officially repoed this forgery to the bank's fraud department. They have launched a formal investigation. I have consulted with legal counsel regarding this matter. I then laid out the consequences of their actions. I explained that with my previous contributions gone, they were now solely responsible for 2 monthly payments, the original mortgage and the HELOC payment. I attached a new spreadsheet showing the combined monthly total, which I estimated to be close to $4,000. I knew, based on my mother's pension and my assessment of Luke's actual, not imagined, income, that this was an impossible sum for them to pay. Then came the final part of the plan, my ultimatum. I gave them 2 options. Option A, they could immediately begin the process of selling the house. The proceeds would be used to pay off the primary mortgage and the fraudulent HELOC in full. As a co-owner of the property, I was entitled to 50% of the remaining equity. Given their fraud, I was well within my rights to demand this. This option would leave them with some cash, but homeless. Option B, my mother could sign the house over to me completely. I would take her name off the deed, assume full ownership, and in exchange, I would take responsibility for both the mortgage and the HELOC. She and Luke would have 30 days to vacate the property. This option would save their credit from the stain of foreclosure, but they would walk away with nothing. I would then decide whether to keep the house as a rental property or sell it myself. I gave them a deadline of 72 hours to respond with their chosen option. I ended the email with a single sentence. If I do not receive a response, or if you attempt to contest this, I will proceed with filing a formal police report for fraud and forgery and let the bank proceed with foreclosure. I read the email over a dozen times. It was the hardest thing I had ever written. It felt like I was foreclosing on my own family, on my own childhood, but they had forced my hand. They had treated me like a bank, and now the bank was calling in the loan. I hit send, and a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had taken back control. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the quiet, sensible daughter they could manipulate and exploit. I was the primary stakeholder, and I was liquidating the assets. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. The 72-hour deadline ticked by, each hour stretching into an eternity. I knew they were panicking. I knew they were scrambling. I could almost hear the frantic, whispered conversations. They had finally realized that the host they had been feeding on for so long had developed an immune response. The response came not as an email, but as a phone call exactly 71 hours after I had sent my ultimatum. It was my mother. Her name flashed on my screen, and I took a deep breath before answering, putting the phone on speaker so Ella could listen in from across the room. I had asked her to be there for support, to be my witness. "Hello," I said, my voice steady and professional. "Claire." My mother's voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears. "Claire, I got your email." "Honey, there has to be some kind of misunderstanding." I didn't respond. I just let her talk, letting the silence force her to fill the void. We were going to tell you," she stammered. "Luke needed the money. His startup was having some cash flow problems and he had some unexpected expenses. It was just a short-term loan. We were going to pay it all back before you ever found out." The excuse was so pathetic, so transparently false that I almost laughed. They had been hiding this for 18 months. There was nothing short-term about it. You forged my signature, Mom, I said, my tone flat and devoid of emotion. You committed a crime using my name and risked the only home this family has. It was a mistake, she cried, her voice rising in desperation. We were desperate. Luke promised he would have it all paid back by now, but his bonus didn't come through. You can't do this to us, Claire. You can't kick us out of our home. This is your home, too. Your father would be so disappointed. The mention of my father was a calculated, low blow, and it made my blood boil. My father would be disappointed that you conspired with my brother to steal from me and defraud a bank, I retorted, my voice like ice. He would be disgusted that you risked the very house he worked his whole life to pay for just to fund Luke's fantasy lifestyle. There was a shuffling sound on the other end of the line, and then Luke's voice, angry and defiant, cut in. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You've always been jealous of me, and now you have a chance to ruin my life. Ruin your life. I asked, incredulous. Luke, you ruined your own life. You built it on a foundation of lies and theft. That foundation just crumbled. This isn't about jealousy, it's about consequences. It's a concept you've managed to avoid for 30 years, but the grace period is over. I could hear my mother sobbing in the background. Please, Claire, Luke pleaded, his tone shifting from anger to a desperate whine. Don't do this, I'll pay you back, I swear. I'll get another job, I'll do anything. We can't sell the house. Mom has nowhere else to go. She could have lived there for the rest of her life rent-free if you two hadn't been so greedy, I said calmly. But you made a choice. You chose to risk it all. Now you have to live with the outcome of that choice. I gave you 2 options. The deadline is in 1 hour. Which one is it going to be? The line went silent for a long moment. I could hear their muffled, frantic whispers. They were trapped. Option A meant public humiliation and financial ruin. Selling the house would involve real estate agents, lawyers, and public listings. Their friends and neighbors would all know. Option B was a quiet surrender. It was humiliating, but private. It offered them a way out without a foreclosure on their record. Finally, my mother came back on the line, her voice defeated. Option B, she whispered, her voice cracking. We'll sign the house over to you. Good, I said. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with the paperwork. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. I will be changing the locks on the 31st day. 30 days, Luke shouted in the background. Where are we supposed to go in 30 days? That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem, I replied, quoting a line he had used on me countless times. I added, you could ask the Parasite for help, but she's a little busy setting up her new life. Before they could respond, I hung up. I ended the call. Ella looked at me, her eyes wide. Are you okay? She asked softly. A single tear rolled down my cheek, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated relief. It was over. The fight was won. I had stood up for myself, not by shouting or seeking revenge, but by applying the same cold, hard logic they had ignored for so long. Their world, propped up by my money and their deceit, had collapsed, and I was the one who had pulled out the foundational support. The conversation wasn't a confrontation in the way I had imagined. It wasn't a shouting match. It was a capitulation. It was the sound of 2 people who had run out of lies, excuses, and other people's money. It was the sound of a debt finally, painfully, being called due. The Parasite had shed its hosts, and they were left to fend for themselves for the very first time. The 30 days that followed were a quiet, tense countdown. I communicated with them only through my lawyer. The paperwork was drawn up, transferee. NG the deed of the house entirely into my name. In exchange for my mother's signature, I formally agreed to assume all financial responsibility for both the primary mortgage and the fraudulent HELOC, releasing her from the debt. It was a bitter pill to swallow, taking on a $50,000 debt that wasn't mine, but it was the price of a clean break and full ownership of the property. My lawyer advised it was the quickest, cleanest way to secure the asset. My mother signed the papers without a fight. The bravado and defiance were gone, replaced by a resigned, hollowed-out acceptance. The house was now mine, legally and completely. During that month, I started looking for a new place to live, a small apartment just for me. Staying with Ella had been a lifesaver, but I craved my own space, a sanctuary that had no connection to my past. I found a perfect 1-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood and signed the lease. The day I got my own keys was one of the happiest days of my life. As for my mother and Luke, their world unraveled with astonishing speed. Without the house as a home base and my money as a safety net, reality hit them hard. Luke's flashy marketing job turned out to be far less stable than he had let on. The startup he worked for was burning through cash, and without the impressive car and the ability to project an image of wealth, his confidence and, consequently, his performance plummeted. He was let go 2 months after they moved out. Without a steady income, he couldn't afford an apartment on his own. My mother, with only her small pension, couldn't support herself either. They ended up renting a small, grim one-bedroom apartment in a less-than-desirable part of town, a place where they both had to share a room. The golden boy and his enabling mother, stripped of their comforts, were forced into a proximity that I'm sure bred nothing but resentment. All of their friends and extended family, who had once been so impressed by Luke's apparent success, now saw the truth. Word got around. People talk. The story of how they lost the family home became a cautionary tale whispered at family gatherings I no longer attended. The aftermath for me was complicated. Financially, I was burdened with the HELOC, which set my own homeownership goals back significantly. I decided not to move into my old house. The memories were too toxic. Instead, I hired a property management company, had the locks changed, and rented it out. The rental income covered both mortgages and the taxes, and even left a small amount of positive cash flow each month. The house my father built, the asset they tried to leverage into ruin, was now my first investment property. It was a symbol of my victory, a steady, reliable source of income generated from the ashes of their betrayal. About 6 months after they moved out, I received a long, rambling email from my mother. It was a mix of apology, blame, and self-pity. She apologized for her mistakes, but also lamented how difficult her life had become, how much she missed her home, and how Luke was struggling with depression. She ended the email by asking if I could find it in my heart to help them, just a little, to get back on their feet. I read the email once, then twice. The part of me that was the dutiful daughter, the caretaker, felt a small, familiar pang of guilt. But then I thought of the word parasite. I thought of the forged signature. I thought of the years of disrespect and financial exploitation. I realized that any money I sent them would not be help, it would be poison. It would be restarting the toxic cycle I had fought so hard to break. I typed a short, simple reply. I wish you both the best in building a new life for yourselves. I didn't offer money. I didn't offer forgiveness. I offered closure. I hit send and then blocked her email address and phone number and Luke's as well. It was the final cord I needed to cut. Today, my life is quiet, stable, and entirely my own. I love my little apartment. My finances are back on track, and the rental income from my first property is slowly paying down the fraudulent debt. I still have a relationship with my friend Ella, who remains my rock. I am building a new foundation, one based on my own hard work, honesty, and self-respect. I don't know for sure what happened to Luke and Madeline in the long run. I hear bits and pieces through the grapevine, but I don't seek out information. Their story is no longer my story. They built their house on a foundation of lies, using my trust as their primary material. When I left, the structure collapsed, and they were left to reap what they had sowed in a field of their own making. It was a painful, brutal lesson, but one I had to learn. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to let the people dragging you down face the consequences of their own actions. The parasite is finally free.